Alien mocked with humanity, Leviathan the Leviathan-Class warship appeared, and High Command knelt in silence. The deposition had been open for 40 minutes when Sovi Dehen's secondary eyelid moved for the first time. She noted it the way she noted everything, without expression, without pause, with the precise interior click of a thing being filed. 40 minutes. 4,401 depositions across her service record. The eyelid had moved twice before. Both times, the sessions that followed became the two most consequential hearings in conquered history. She had not known that at the time. She had only known that something in the record did not fit. This time, the thing that did not fit was the tense. The witness, Fleet Commander Nethkara's, 34 years of service, Vethani gray banding at both temples, was speaking in present tense. The deposition format required past. He had not noticed. Sovi had not corrected him. Her recording filament glowed faintly at both temples, capturing everything, and what it was capturing was a man who had not fully returned from somewhere he was describing as if he were still there. "It is 4.8 kilometers long," Kyra said. His hands were flat on the table. He had placed them that way at the start of the session and had not moved them. A man who had trained himself, over 34 years, to keep his hands still when he spoke. "Hull dark, no markings," he stopped. "In every other language I have." He stopped again. Sovi Dehen's secondary eyelid completed its close. Neither of them acknowledged what the other had just done. No faction insignia, no fleet registration, no engagement history. That was what the record contained. That was what the record would continue to contain, because the Galactic Concord's classification system, 11,000 years of accumulated taxonomy, 312 entries, not one unclassified return in 847 years, still had the contact logged exactly as the system had returned it on the day of the Kavani engagement at Dreth Station. The Concord had not recovered. The intake form was still in Archive Hall 17, margin note still legible in the hand of an archivist who had retired to Yeth Station and had not been called to this deposition, who had signed 4,000 forms across 30 years of service and had never thought about that particular one again. The commission document was in Kara's left breast pocket. It had been there since day 14. He had not opened it. He knew every word. The problem was that the words no longer meant what they had meant on the morning he read them. Sovi adjusted the angle of her recording filament, standard procedure between testimony sections. She had done this 4,400 times. The filament hummed at the same frequency it always did. 3 years earlier, the great chamber at Velith Station. The ozone hit first. That was how Sovi remembered it later, cross-referencing her own archived notes from a different session, not this one, but one that had touched on Velith Station's atmospheric profile in passing. 40 processors running in the chamber walls. Ozone, hot metal, a faint chemical sweetness underneath that she had never been able to identify precisely, and had eventually logged as processor byproduct, unclassified compound, non-hazardous asterisk. It was nothing like the recycled stillness of Reckoning Chamber Orvath, where the air tasted of a system doing its job and nothing more. But she had not been in the great chamber at Velith Station that day. She was here now in Orvath, reconstructing it through Kara's testimony. The amber panels behind the elder's bench had not yet warmed fully. The light in the chamber was still the cold, flat light of early session. It made everything look slightly more permanent than it was. The schematic had arrived in the great chamber at Velith Station on a morning in the 3rd month of what the Concord calendar designated as administrative year 7441. It arrived as a Category 7 technical disclosure, the same filing tier as agricultural equipment patents, revised irrigation specifications, and updated load tolerances for cargo platforms on outer ring stations. The intake archivist on duty had processed it between a grain storage efficiency proposal from the Hethani Farming Collective and a request to reclassify a specific subspecies of Drevathi ground crawler as domesticated rather than wild. She had written 2 words in the margin, speculative, unverified. She had closed the folder. She was retired now on Yeth Station. She had not been called. The schematic had been filed. The filing had been processed. The processing had generated a standard intake acknowledgement. The acknowledgement had been archived. At no point in this sequence had anyone requested verification because, as the intake notation read in the flat language of administrative record, no verification was requested because none was needed. Category 7 filings were not reviewed. They were stored. Storage was the mechanism. The mechanism had worked exactly as it was designed to work. 3 seats from the front of the Great Chamber, Grand Marshal Thurek Kale of the Kavani Directorate had looked at the schematic for 4 seconds. Then he laughed. The laugh was a Kavani harmonic, a layered sound, 2 tones at once, the lower one doing something to the air that conquered translators rendered as asterisk formal amusement. 2 rows back, Fleet-Second Kale Drueth smiled. It was a small smile. The kind a person makes when they already know the outcome and are watching someone else work their way toward the same conclusion more slowly. The schematic technical designation filed but not publicly cross-referenced showed a vessel. A single vessel. Hull dark profile, no IFF transponder signature, no faction registration, no formation assignment. The Kavani Directorate had seen 312 classified vessel profiles in the Concord's open record. They had seen perhaps another 60 in restricted exchange. They had built 44 capital ships of their own, each one a proven instrument. Kale's personal record ran to 19 notches on his command insignia, and he counted only wins. His species had never needed a second column. He looked at the schematic for 4 seconds. He laughed. The intake archivist's margin note was, in this moment, perfectly correct. Fleet Commander Neth Karas had been 31 years into his service record when the Kavani matter first appeared in his briefing queue. He did not look like a man who made predictions. He was the kind of officer who had learned over 3 decades to read a room the way a navigator reads dead space. By what wasn't there, by the shape of the silence, by the specific weight of things that had been left out. He reached toward his left breast pocket sometimes when he was thinking. He did not always complete the gesture. By the time the commissioned document had been in that pocket for 14 days, the motion had become a reflex he performed without finishing. He was 61 in the deposition room. He looked older than that in the way that certain kinds of experience ages a person not in the face but in the hands. His hands were flat on the table. They had been flat since the session opened. Sophie noted the hands the way she noted everything. She also noted that he had not reached for the pocket once. The commissioned document was a standard inquiry authorization, ghost gray fold lines, ink gone soft at the creases from the weeks of sitting compressed against his side. He had read it on the morning it was issued. He had understood, at the time, what it was authorizing, a formal deposition on the events of the Kavani engagement at Dreth Station, with particular attention to the circumstances of the Kavani withdrawal and the vessel contact logged by Dreth Station's sensor array in the final 9 minutes of the engagement. He had understood what it required of him. He had folded it back along the existing lines and placed it in his pocket. He had not unfolded it since. He did not need to, he knew every word. The problem, as he would say later in this room, with his hands flat on the table, was that the words no longer meant what they had meant. Elder Veth Morn sat at the center of the Elder's bench. She had not moved in the 40 minutes the session had been open, which was consistent with Sovi's records on Elder Morn's deposition conduct. At 5,800 years of age, she had attended more hearings than any sitting elder in the chamber's history. She had a single question prepared. She had prepared it before the session opened. She would ask it at the end. Sovi knew this because Morn always had a single question, and Morn always asked it at the end. And in all the depositions Sovi had recorded that Morn attended, the single question had always been the right one. The other 2 elders, Jeth Karon and Orvasi Leth, had not spoken. They would not speak. This was also consistent with the record. Karas looked at his hands. He said, "I want to establish for the record that in 34 years of command I have ordered 0 full withdrawals. I want to establish this before I describe what happened because I want the record to reflect that I understand the difference between a withdrawal and a repositioning. I have ordered 14 repositioning actions. I have ordered 0 withdrawals. What happened at Dreth Station was a withdrawal. It was not mine." Sovi noted the repetition. He had stated the number of full withdrawals twice, once in the sentence where the claim appeared and again, by implication, in the clarification that followed. In 4,400 prior depositions, Sovi had recorded witnesses who repeated themselves for many reasons. Shame, uncertainty, the particular habit of people who were not believed and had learned to double their statements as a kind of structural reinforcement. Karas did not look like a man who expected to be disbelieved. He looked like a man who needed the record to be accurate, because he was not certain he could say it a third time. The Kavani Directorate's interest in Dreth Station had been, in the Concord's administrative record, a matter of territorial consolidation. The station sat at the junction of 3 trade lanes in a sector that the Directorate had been expanding into for 6 years by the time the motion came before the chamber. The Concord's vote, 402 in favor, 9 opposed, had passed in 11 minutes. The discussion preceding the vote had taken 4 hours. Dreth Station had been informed by standard relay, the same mechanism used to notify member system communities of changes to agricultural subsidy schedules and revised transit protocols. The relay had arrived. Dreth Station had acknowledged receipt. Standard relay acknowledgement did not require a response beyond confirmation of receipt. Dreth Station had provided confirmation of receipt. That had been 22 months before the Kavani fleet arrived. Commander Yaret Soon had been running Dreth Station for 24 years by then. Karas described her the way his intelligence reports had described her, which was the way he described everything he had not directly seen, with the specific details that had survived the process of being written down by someone else and had therefore outlasted the noise. Age 51. Gray-cut hair close. 24-year command jacket with a frayed left cuff, not worn through, just frayed, the specific fraying of a cuff that had been rolled back and re-rolled back tens of thousands of times by a person who worked with their hands even in a command role. He had never met her before the engagement. He knew her left cuff. The Kavani fleet arrived on the 14th day of the operation. 44 capital ships. Karas had the full tactical count in the commission document, though he did not open it. He had the numbers the way he had everything about that engagement, which was from the inside out, so fixed in memory that he could have recited the hull displacement figures in his sleep. 51,000 kilotons of combined displacement, in tight formation, standard Kavani advance configuration. Against Dreth Stations, 5 patrol vessels, 2 of which were under maintenance constraints that limited their operational envelope to 60% of rated capacity, and a station population of 14,000. On paper, Karas said, it was not a conflict, it was a calendar. She came, she stated a fact, she set something down. That was how Karas described it later in the deposition, how Soon's transmission had arrived. Not with elevation, not with ceremony. The voice on the channel had sounded like a person who had put something down on a hard surface before speaking, and the silence just before the words was the silence of that thing settling. Dreth Station will not be submitting to administrative absorption at this time. Karas had been reviewing the evacuation timeline when it came through. He had assigned 2 officers to coordinate the non-essential personnel list. He was, in practical terms, doing paperwork. He was not looking at the tactical display when the transmission came through. He was looking at a roster. He heard the words. He stopped looking at the roster. Soon had not finished. She had spoken 5 more words, and those 5 words had done something that no transmission in the 847-year operational history of the Galactic Concord's administrative framework had done before, which was, require the chamber to stop. The Orath Compact is active. Leviathan, Karas's tactical officer, 14 years of service, a man who had developed the habit of keeping his hands flat on his console during briefings without knowing where he had learned it, looked at Karas. Karas did not look back. He was already reaching for the brief the intelligence packet had flagged 44 seconds later. 1 data packet, automatically routed, source listed as *Dreth Station Administrative Archive, classification header reading speculative submissions, unverified. The packet contained a single document. The document was dated 51 years prior. It carried 43 signatories. It had been filed under the same intake category as the schematic that had made Thurek Kale laugh. The same archivist, the same margin note, speculative, unverified. Karas read the activation threshold. He read it twice. Then he set it down. The Orath Compact's activation threshold was simple, as such things went. A sovereignty challenge, defined as the approach of armed vessels to a compact signatory installation without invitation, activated the compact's terms automatically upon 2 conditions: the challenge occurring and 2 independent witnesses being present at the moment of formal invocation. The witnesses did not need to be compact signatories. They needed only to be present. The compact would, upon activation, trigger a response mechanism described in the document in terms that did not specify what the response would be, only that it would come from the original signatories of the agreement, and that the response would be commensurate. 43 signatories. The oldest species on the list had been extinct for 200 years. Karas looked across the deposition table at Sovi Dehan. Sovi looked back. Her eyelid did not move, not yet. 8 minutes after the data packet arrived, Leviathan said, "Sir, long-range contact, configuration unclassified, hull dark, single vessel, no formation, no IFF." Karas had moved to the tactical display. He had been looking at it for 3 seconds before An finished the report. The display had a visual protocol for every category of contact he had ever encountered in 34 years of operational command. Unknown IFF, amber outline pulsing pending resolution. No IFF, red outline pending classification query. Hostile configuration, red fill active alert. Non-hostile unregistered, yellow outline passive monitoring mode. The display had been designed to classify. Classification was its function. It had been performing that function for every contact Karas had ever seen appear on it. It was not performing that function now. The display showed a shape. It showed a size. It showed a distance, 340,000 kilometers off the forward arc. It showed nothing else. No outline color, no fill, no pulsing, no alert mode, just a shape and a size and a number. Above the shape, in the field where the classification tag should have appeared, the system had returned 4 words. Unclassified, insufficient referent. In 847 years of conquered taxonomic record, across 312 cataloged vessel profiles and thousands of incidental contact logs, the system had never returned that combination of words. The system had been designed to always find a referent. The system had always found one. An had not finished the report. "It is not moving toward us," he said. "It is simply a pause, present." The fleet held. The sensors held. The silence held. The tactical display did not change. Karas watched it for 9 minutes and it did not change. The shape held its position at 340,000 kilometers. The distance did not close. The unclassified tag did not resolve. The system continued to run its classification query. He could see the processing indicator cycling in the lower corner of the display, the same small symbol it showed when working through an ambiguous contact. And the system continued to return the same 4 words because the system was not failing. The system was working. It was simply working on a problem it had never been given the tools to solve. He had been in command for 34 years. He had stood at tactical displays during engagements that cost lives, during approaches that could have gone 3 different ways, during moments when the difference between the right call and the wrong one was a number on a screen and the willingness to act on it. He knew how to read a display. He knew how to find the number that mattered and build a decision around it. The display did not have a number that mattered. It had a shape and a size and a distance and nothing else. He counted the minutes the way a man counts things when he cannot do anything else. That was what he said in the deposition room, with his hands flat on the table, to Sovi Dehan and the 3 elders and the recording filament glowing at her temples. He had counted the minutes, not because counting helped, because he was a man who had learned over 34 years that the body needs something to do when the mind cannot move, and counting was the smallest thing he knew how to do without making a decision he wasn't ready to make. 1, 2, 3. He watched the Kavani fleet. The Kavani fleet had also stopped. This was the detail that Karas returned to 3 times in the deposition, not prompted, each time arriving at it from a slightly different angle, the way a person circles a thing they are still trying to understand. The Kavani fleet's behavior in those 9 minutes was not, he said, the behavior of a fleet calculating. It was not the behavior of a fleet waiting for orders or buying time or holding position as a tactical feint. He had seen all of those. He knew what those looked like on a sensor display, the small adjustments, the tight micro-movements of formation management, the specific pattern of a fleet that is still actively deciding. The Kavani fleet was not actively deciding. It was the silence, he said, of a fleet that had just run into a question it thought it already knew the answer to. He looked at his hands. Leviathan had not moved from his console since the contact appeared. His hands were flat. He had put them flat without thinking about it, the same way Kara's did, the reflex learned in proximity to someone who learned it from somewhere else and had never named it. He had 14 years of service. He would add more. In this moment, in the 9th minute, he was watching the same display Kara's was watching, and he was very still. At 8 minutes and 40 seconds, a transmission came through on the open tactical channel. Not from Dreth Station. From the Kavani fleet, specifically from Kale's tactical officer, a call sign Kara's recognized from prior engagement records. It was not a threat. It was not a negotiation. It was a query. Kara's read the transmission aloud in the deposition room, from memory, without opening the commission document in his pocket. What is the designation of the vessel at bearing 047? He paused. They were asking me, he said. They thought I knew. Sovi Dehen's secondary eyelid moved, not fully closed. Halfway, the calibration position, the position it took when her processing reflexes encountered something that did not fit the record and had not yet resolved into a category. She had learned in 4,401 depositions to trust that reflex. She wrote nothing. She watched. Kara said, I did not have a designation to give them. He said, I still do not. The system had returned unclassified, insufficient referent. The Kavani tactical officer had transmitted a query asking for the vessel's designation. The Kavani fleet, 44 capital ships, 51,000 kilotons of combined displacement, the most decorated active commander in Directorate history, had been unable to classify the contact on their own. They had asked Kara's. Kara's had not answered. The recontextualization settled over the deposition room the way certain realizations settle, not fast, not with force, but with the specific weight of a thing that cannot be put back where it was. The unclassified return was not a gap in the Concord's record. It was a gap in the record of everyone present. The Kavani had tried. The Kavani had also failed. The shape at 340,000 kilometers was not unknown to the galactic Concord because the Concord had missed something. It was unknown because knowing it, apparently, required something that neither the Concord nor the Kavani Directorate nor any active civilization in the current record possessed. At 9 minutes and 3 seconds, the private channel opened. Thurak Kale transmitted 4 words. Kara stopped. He looked at his hands. He started again. He would not repeat the 4 words in the deposition room. He said this directly, not as a refusal, but as a statement of position, the same flat declarative confidence he had used for everything else. I won't repeat them here. They are in the record. They are in the signal log. Anyone who needs to read them can read them there. He paused. I'll tell you what they were not. They were not tactical. They were not a threat. They were not a demand for terms. Elder Vethmorn had not moved. They were, Kara said, the words of a man who has just finished being wrong about something he held for 44 years. Another pause, longer than the others. The Kavani count their wins, you know this. Kale had 19. He has never needed a second column. His hands were still flat. I have thought about those 4 words many times since the engagement. I don't believe he planned to send them. I believe they were the words that were left after everything he had built his career on had just been reclassified. The fleet began to withdraw 6 minutes later. Sovi adjusted the angle of her recording filament. She had done this 4,401 times. She adjusted it the same way each time, a small rotation, left then right, bringing the capture field back to optimal alignment after long periods of fixed-angle recording. The filament hummed. The amber panels behind the elder's bench had warmed further in the last hour. The light in the chamber was starting to shift. She noted that Kara's had stopped speaking. She noted that he had been still for longer than the pauses between his other sections. Then he started again. And this time the tense did not change, because it had already broken, and what came through now was what had been there from the start, the part of the testimony that was not, technically speaking, passed. It is 4.8 kilometers long, he said. The same words the session had already heard 40 minutes earlier at the moment Sovi's eyelid first moved. Now she had the context. Now she had the 34 years and the 9 minutes and the 4 words and the compact and the archivist's margin note and Kale's fleet going still at 340,000 kilometers. She had all of it. The words were the same. They were not the same words. Hull dark, he said. The hull absorbs light, not completely, but enough that on a visual display it appears less than solid, like a mass that has decided not to be seen rather than a mass that cannot be seen. There is a difference. It is hard to explain in a report. I am aware of how that sounds. No faction insignia, no fleet registration, no engagement history. The triad he had delivered at the start, flatly in plain language like a man reading from a list, now carried the full weight of everything that had followed it. Sovi heard it again in the shape of the pause after his next words. The deposition format did not allow a witness to backtrack. Kara's did not backtrack. He simply continued forward into the description, and the description was the thing. No markings of any kind, he said. I have commanded vessels. I know what a ship looks like when it is built by something that intends to be recognized. Registration marks. Formation lights. The small visible choices that say this is ours, this is where we are from. They are not just identification. They are a statement of presence. Every vessel I have seen in 34 years makes that statement. He stopped. This one did not. He paused. It was not trying to be hidden. That is also hard to explain. A vessel that is hiding behaves differently. It uses the environment, it minimizes its profile, it takes the angles that reduce its footprint. This vessel was not hiding. It was simply not announcing. It was present the way a very old thing is present, the way something is present when it has never needed to explain itself. Sovi's eyelid closed for the second time. She noted it. She did not stop recording. Kara's had not seen it. He was looking at his hands. The way it arrived, he said. That is the part I keep returning to. Not fast, not slow. The thing that was hard to put in tactical language was that it had not arrived at speed. It had not decelerated from approach. It had not appeared at the edge of sensor range and closed the distance. The sensor log, which Sovi had reviewed separately, which was part of the record, which would be available to anyone who opened the archive file from the Kavani engagement, showed the contact appearing at 340,000 kilometers, not approaching to 340,000 kilometers. Appearing there. In 34 years, Kara said, I have learned how things move when they are in a hurry. I have also learned how things move when they are not. This was something else. This was how something moves when the concept of hurrying has never applied to it. He paused. It occupied the space, he said, the way a very large thing occupies space when it has been in that space or spaces like it for a very long time. The sensor readings, Sovi had reviewed these too. The vessel's energy signature had not matched any profile in the Concord's database, which was why the system had returned unclassified before the visual confirmation even resolved. The energy signature was not absent. A cold hull, a dead vessel, would have registered differently. It was present. It was simply not a signature the database had a category for. The database had been built across 11,000 years of taxonomy. It had 312 entries. It had never returned an empty result. This was the moment Sovi identified, in her personal institutional note written later, as the moment the stakes had shifted from a question about one engagement to a question about the category itself. The Concord's identity was its ability to name things. Name a thing and you could file it. File it and you could act on it. Act on it and you were in control of the situation. This had held for 11,000 years across 312 entries, and one taxonomy that had grown to be the most complete record of sentient vessel profiles in the known systems. The Concorde had encountered something it could not name. The Kavani had encountered something they could not name. Both of them had been in the same 9 minutes, watching the same shape, and neither of them had been able to do the one thing their entire operational history had been built around. Kara's had the document, Kara's had the record, Kara's had 34 years of the wrong question. The wrong question was, what is the threat profile? The withdrawal took 6 minutes and 40 seconds from Kale's transmission to the moment the last Kavani capital ship cleared the engagement boundary. Kara's had watched it on the tactical display. He described the sequence the way he described everything that had gone into long-term memory through repeated examination. With the specific clarity of something you have reviewed so many times it has stopped being a memory and started being a fact. Not a retreat, not a repositioning, a withdrawal. In a retreat, there is urgency. Formations break and reform on the move, covering fire faster than optimal burn rates because time matters more than fuel. In a repositioning, there is calculation. The fleet is going somewhere specific. The angles are deliberate. The spacing shifts to match the new tactical geometry. Kale's fleet did neither. It turned, in sequence, in the order a fleet turns when it has decided to leave and is not in a hurry to arrive somewhere else. Each ship following the one before it, the formation maintained, the burn rate steady. The way a thing leaves when it has simply decided to be gone. Kara's watched the Kavani fleet leave on his tactical display, and he said in the deposition room that the word that had come to him was *dignity. He said it with some discomfort. It was not a tactical term. He was aware it was not a tactical term. He was aware that using it in a deposition record was not standard practice. He used it anyway. The record would have to contain it, he said, because it was the accurate word, and he was here to be accurate. Thurek Kale had led 19 engagements and had never left one without a win. He was leaving this one without a fight. He was leaving it with 4 words on a private channel and a fleet withdrawal that looked. Kara's paused here. The way he paused when he was about to say something he had not said out loud before, it looked, he said, like respect. Sovi wrote nothing. She would write it later in her institutional notation. Witness used the word respect. Witness appeared aware of how this would read in the record. Witness did not retract it. Soon never transmitted again after the 5 words. The vessel held position at 340,000 kilometers for 14 hours after the Kavani fleet cleared the sector boundary. Kara's had remained on the bridge for all 14 hours. He had not ordered anyone else to leave. No one had asked to. The vessel did not do anything in those 14 hours. It was simply there. And then it was not. Kara's said, the sensor log shows no departure event, no drive signature, no change in the reading. The contact was present at the 1358 mark. At the 1359 mark, the contact was not present. The system did not record a transition because, as best anyone has been able to determine, there was no transition to record. It was there. Then it was not there, the same way it arrived. He said, the Concord's classification system still has it logged as unclassified. I checked this morning. Sovi's eyelid closed for the 3rd time. It did not reopen for 47 seconds. She did not note the duration at the time. She noted it later. In the 47 seconds, she was doing something she had not done in any of her 4,400 prior depositions, which was sitting with a record and understanding that the record was accurate and that the record was also completely insufficient and that both of those things were true at the same time. The filing was real. The margin note was real. The 847-year first was real. The eyelid had moved 3 times now. In her history, the eyelid had moved twice before, and both sessions had become the 2 most consequential hearings in Concord history. She was in the 3rd one. She wrote in her private notation, tense broke in phase 1. Witness was describing a past event in present tense. This has not occurred in 4,401 depositions. Witness was not performing. Witness was unable to locate the event in the past. The event has not, for this witness, concluded. Record this. File it accurately. The record is all there is. Kara set his hands on the table. He had not moved them in 90 minutes. He said, there is one more thing. It is not in the commission record. I am stating it here because I looked it up and I believe the record should have it. The 3 elders were still. Sovi was still. The intake archivist who processed the Category 7 filing, he said. 3 years ago, before the engagement, before the compact activated, he paused. Her name is Maradon. She served 30 years in the intake division at Velith Station. She signed 4,000 intake forms in that time. She processed agricultural patents and equipment filings and the smallest administrative records the Concord generates. He looked at his hands. She wrote speculative, unverified. On one of them, in a margin, with a standard notation stylus. And then she closed the folder and finished her shift and went home. He was quiet for a moment. That is the only form she ever got right. Elder Vethmorn had not moved in 112 minutes. She asked her question. In 34 years of command, she said, have you ever ordered a withdrawal before today's testimony? Kara's looked at his hands. No, he said. She nodded once. It was a small nod, the nod of a person who has 5,800 years of practice and has learned that the body confirms things the voice has already said. The nod did not help. It was not meant to. It was the close of a parenthesis that Morn had opened at the start of the session, when she had arranged herself in the elder's chair and prepared her one question and waited. She had the answer. The answer was in the record. The record was complete. Testimony complete. Record closed. Refer to archive reclassification protocol. Sovi entered the notation. She entered it the same way she entered every notation without expression, in the flat institutional language that the record required, in the voice that existed to serve the record rather than to have opinions about it. The notation was accurate. The record was closed. The reclassification took 11 days. The Orath Compact's activation threshold, sovereignty challenge, 2 independent witnesses present at formal invocation, had been met. The 2 witnesses were in the record. The Compact's response had been commensurate. The institution had all the documentation it needed to confirm what had occurred and to begin the formal process of understanding what that meant, which would take considerably longer than 11 days, and which SciFi, in her private notation, estimated would still be ongoing at the time of her retirement. The Category 7 intake form, margin note still legible, 2 words in the hand of Marathon, retired Yeth Station, was moved from Archive Hall 17 to Archive Hall 1. It was the first document in Concord history to make that transfer. The form arrived in Hall 1 in a standard archival container. The receiving archivist logged it with a standard intake notation. He noted in the log that the container's contents were described as a single category, 7 filing, original and unaltered, reclassified under executive order following the Orvath deposition proceedings. He did not write anything in the margin. Kairos stood. He reached into his left breast pocket and took out the commissioned document. The paper had gone soft at the fold lines, weeks of compression, the specific texture of a thing that had lived close to a person for a long time. He looked at it for a moment. Then he folded it once more, along a line that had not been there before, cutting across the old ghost-gray creases at a new angle, a new crease over old marks. The document was the same, the crease was new, the man was not. He put it back in his pocket. He left the chamber. SciFi Dehen closed the deposition record at 14:07 station time. The amber panels behind the elder's bench had fully warmed by then. The light in Reckoning Chamber Orvath was the same color it had been when the session opened, falling at the same angle across the same table and the same chairs and the same institutional gray of the walls. It looked the same as it had at the start. It was not the same light,